Donald Trump's decision to mobilize the National Guard in 19 states set off one of the most aggressive crackdowns on crime in modern history. Behind the bold move stood soldiers, investigators, and intelligence officers racing against time, while criminals, corrupt officials, and international syndicates lurked in the shadows. As names surfaced, trusted sheriffs turned traitors, local leaders exposed as collaborators, and faceless masterminds pulling strings from abroad, the story became more than a fight for law and order. It became a chilling reminder that the greatest dangers often come not from enemies we see, but from those hidden within the very systems meant to protect us. Here's an expanded version of Chapter 1 with around 400 words, keeping the language simple, suspenseful, and easy to follow. The year began with a sudden and shocking rise in crime that caught communities completely off guard. Reports of violent robberies, gang activity, and smuggling operations poured into police stations across multiple states. Neighborhoods once considered safe suddenly felt dangerous. Citizens whispered about suspicious strangers in their streets, unusual deliveries at odd hours, and a sense of lawlessness that seemed to grow by the day. Small towns that rarely saw trouble now faced burglaries and thefts, while large cities struggled with an increasing number of shootings and violent incidents. The police, already stretched thin, were overwhelmed. Calls for help often went unanswered, and officers patrolled with caution, knowing that danger could strike at any moment. At the center of this growing crisis, the federal government recognized that conventional measures would not be enough. The rise in crime was not confined to a single area. It spanned across the nation, and state resources were inadequate to handle the scale of the threat. The administration began to evaluate more aggressive approaches, looking for a solution that would send a clear message to criminals: chaos would no longer be tolerated. President Trump, facing mounting pressure from both the public and political allies, took decisive action. He announced the mobilization of the National Guard in 19 states, a move that stunned the nation. Critics immediately called it extreme, questioning whether deploying military forces to assist local law enforcement was necessary. Supporters argued it was long overdue, citing the visible breakdown in public safety and the fear gripping communities. The National Guard arrived swiftly, setting up checkpoints, monitoring highways, and conducting coordinated patrols. Their presence was unlike anything residents had seen before, instilling both fear and relief. Streets that had been unsafe for months suddenly felt more controlled, though tension lingered in the air. Criminals, realizing they were being watched, began to change their methods, operating under the cover of night and seeking alternative routes to evade capture. Even as the first wave of operations began, intelligence reports hinted that the problem ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Organized networks had been quietly moving people and contraband across borders, often evading detection entirely. It became clear that this was not just a surge in crime. It was the uncovering of a sophisticated, hidden system. The National Guard's presence was a first step in a larger, dangerous struggle, and the coming weeks promised to reveal more about the unseen forces behind the nation's rising unrest. As the National Guard tightened its presence on city streets and along borders, investigators began uncovering the hidden layers of the criminal surge. It became clear that the spike in crime was not random or spontaneous. Sophisticated smuggling networks had been operating for years, exploiting weak points in law enforcement and moving illegal goods and people with near-perfect precision. Small towns and rural areas, once overlooked by authorities, were now revealed as critical nodes in a vast underground system. The Guard's deployment forced these networks to adapt quickly. Smugglers changed their routes, moving under the cover of darkness, using abandoned warehouses, empty fields, and remote roadways as temporary storage sites. Drones and surveillance cameras captured fleeting glimpses of convoys and hidden shipments, but tracking them in real time proved challenging. Each intercepted operation revealed a complex web of connections that extended far beyond state lines, suggesting that local gangs were only part of a much larger, more organized syndicate. Intelligence analysts noticed a chilling pattern. Certain shipments, consistently moved without interference, indicated the presence of insiders, individuals with access to information about law enforcement activity. This explained why some attempts to crack down had failed in the past, and why certain areas continued to experience criminal activity despite increased police patrols. The revelation sent shockwaves through the operation. The enemy was not just outside, it was inside the system itself. Meanwhile, the communities affected by crime remained tense. Residents reported seeing unfamiliar faces in their neighborhoods, trucks moving at odd hours, and strange activity near supposedly secure facilities. People felt watched and vulnerable, unsure who to trust. The presence of the National Guard brought some relief, but the sense of danger lingered. Each day seemed to bring a new discovery: a hidden stash of weapons, a forgotten safe house, or a group of individuals coordinating movements across multiple counties. Investigators realized that dismantling these operations would require more than arrests. It would demand a systematic understanding of the entire network, mapping connections, tracing financial transactions, and predicting the criminals' next moves became a race against time. The stakes were high, and the margin for error was razor thin. Every breakthrough revealed another layer of complexity, demonstrating that the rise in crime was not a series of isolated events, but a carefully orchestrated effort exploiting the weaknesses of the system. The National Guard, once a symbol of immediate action, was now part of a much deeper investigation, a battle to uncover the unseen forces driving the chaos and restore control before the networks could adapt again. Just as the operation appeared to gain strength, a disturbing discovery shifted the entire direction of the crackdown. Evidence emerged suggesting that not all members of law enforcement were working toward the same goal. A cache of leaked documents showed that sensitive information, including patrol routes, shipment inspections, and even National Guard deployment schedules, had been passed into the hands of criminal organizations. This was not an accidental lapse. It was deliberate sabotage from within. The revelation spread through the investigation like a shockwave. Suddenly, the failures that once seemed like bad luck made sense. Raids that had been compromised, convoys that had vanished moments before interception, and suspects who always seemed one step ahead, all of it pointed to betrayal. The criminal networks had infiltrated the very institutions designed to stop them. It was a devastating realization, and it fueled suspicion at every level. Communities already rattled by crime now faced the idea that their protectors might have been aiding the enemy. The names of trusted officials began to surface in whispered rumors, and each arrest connected the dots in ways few wanted to believe. Some of the individuals implicated were not minor figures, but respected leaders with years of service. Their downfall shook entire departments, leaving gaps in authority that only deepened the chaos. The criminals, emboldened by their inside connections, had been running an operation with remarkable precision. They knew where checkpoints would be established, which roads to avoid, and how long they had before enforcement units arrived. This allowed them to slip through the cracks, often just minutes ahead of capture. The betrayal turned what was meant to be a straightforward mission into a dangerous and unpredictable conflict. In response, investigators had to change tactics. Communication systems were locked down, background checks were reopened, and operations became tighter and more secretive. Only a small circle of trusted individuals were given access to mission details. The fight against crime was no longer just about dismantling smuggling rings. It was also about rooting out corruption embedded in positions of power. The National Guard, once deployed to protect, now found themselves guarding not only communities, but the very integrity of the mission. With each day that passed, the scope of the betrayal became clearer, revealing that the battle was not only against criminals on the outside, but against traitors within. The exposure of corruption created a turning point in the operation. What began as a crackdown on gangs and smugglers now evolved into a full-scale campaign to rebuild trust and outmaneuver enemies both inside and outside the system. The administration doubled its efforts, introducing advanced surveillance technology, encrypted communication, and tighter coordination between military units and federal agencies. Drones circled the skies above border towns, scanning for hidden convoys. Mobile command centers were dispatched to hotspots, their screens glowing with maps, intercepted calls, and real-time intelligence. The strategy was no longer reactive. It was calculated, anticipating moves before criminals had the chance to make them.
The shift produced results. In 1 week alone, several major warehouses filled with contraband were raided simultaneously across multiple states. Arrests followed swiftly, with suspects tied to networks spanning from rural backroads to urban hubs. Financial investigators traced the flow of money, uncovering shell companies and secret accounts that revealed just how deeply the networks were embedded in local economies. The numbers were staggering, exposing millions of dollars circulating through illegal pipelines. Communities that had been drowning in fear began to see change. Streets once dominated by nightly violence grew quiet. Businesses reopened, families felt safer walking outside, and local leaders cautiously spoke of hope returning. But for every success, there was a lingering reminder that the enemy was not yet defeated. Intelligence suggested that while many operations had been dismantled, new ones were forming in the shadows, adapting quickly to the crackdown. What troubled investigators most was the sophistication of the networks. They were not simply gangs operating independently, but carefully linked groups working like pieces of a larger machine. Every shipment seized seemed to be part of a bigger puzzle, pointing towards something more extensive than local law enforcement had ever imagined. Arrests yielded valuable information, but suspects remained tight-lipped, leaving more questions than answers. The National Guard, once seen as an extraordinary measure, became the backbone of the campaign. Their armored vehicles, nighttime patrols, and constant presence sent a message of strength. Yet the more visible their power became, the more elusive the masterminds seemed. Success was undeniable, but there was also a growing realization. These victories were part of a much larger battle, and the most dangerous players had not yet revealed themselves. The final weeks of the crackdown delivered revelations that reframed everything uncovered so far. Investigators had assumed they were dealing with isolated gangs and regional smugglers, but the evidence pointed to something far more powerful. Documents seized during coordinated raids revealed international links, stretching beyond American borders and connecting to syndicates that operated across multiple continents. What seemed like local crime waves were, in truth, the visible edges of a sprawling global operation that thrived on instability and corruption. High-profile arrests soon followed. Known figures in organized crime, long thought untouchable, were brought into custody. Their homes and businesses were searched, uncovering ledgers filled with coded entries that tracked millions of dollars in illegal trade. The seizures included luxury cars, hidden weapons, caches, and stacks of forged passports. Each detail reinforcing the scale of the conspiracy. It was no longer simply about maintaining order in neighborhoods. It had become a matter of national security. The National Guard, originally deployed to patrol streets and calm frightened communities, found themselves participating in operations that resembled military campaigns. Helicopters swept across remote regions, armored convoys sealed off highways, and raids were conducted with precision in multiple cities at once. The show of force was unprecedented, and for the first time in months, citizens believed the tide had turned for good. Fear was replaced with cautious optimism as word spread of the syndicates unraveling. Yet even in victory, unease lingered. Analysts warned that dismantling networks of this magnitude did not guarantee their end. Syndicates had the ability to regroup, to shift their operations to other regions, and to exploit new weaknesses whenever they appeared. The arrests and seizures were extraordinary achievements, but the war against organized crime was far from over. The nation had seen how deeply corruption could burrow into trusted institutions, how betrayal could come from within, and how swiftly chaos could spread when left unchecked. As the dust settled, the operation was declared a success, but it left behind a sobering truth. Crime could be fought, criminals could be captured, and systems of corruption could be exposed. But the threat was never permanently erased. It waited in the shadows, watching, preparing, ready to rise again if vigilance faltered. The crackdown had saved communities and restored order, yet it also revealed the fragility of safety itself, reminding everyone that the struggle against hidden forces was endless. And the next battle could begin at any moment.